France's most watched news channel, 2 national radio networks, a regional newspaper group, a national business daily, an online video outlet, and a sports channel currently being finalized. Together they employ more than 1,600 journalists, which the group says makes it the second largest newsroom in France, and the largest in private hands. All of it belongs to a container shipping company in Marseille. CMA CGM is the world's third largest shipping line. It runs around 650 vessels, calls at 420 ports, and employs roughly 160,000 people. It also owns BFM TV, which about 10 million French viewers watch every day. And the buying didn't stop at media. Since 2022, the company has spent nearly 5 billion euros on one of France's biggest logistics groups, $2.8 billion on container terminals in New York, and further sums on a British rail freight operator, FedEx's supply chain division, and a Lebanese distributor. The founding family separately took 4% of the supermarket chain Carrefour. All of it traces back to one number. In 2022, CMA CGM posted a net profit of $24.9 billion. According to the analysts at Alphaliner, that was the largest annual profit ever recorded by a French company. And unlike almost every rival, CMA CGM did not hand it to shareholders. The ports, the warehouses, the railways, that's a shipping line buying the rest of the journey, and every one of those purchases makes obvious commercial sense. A television station doesn't move cargo, so what is it for? The money makes sense only once you know how unusual this company's ownership is. CMA CGM was founded in 1978 by Jacques Saadé, a Lebanese businessman who left Beirut as the civil war took hold and rebuilt in Marseille. 47 years later, the company is the third largest container carrier on Earth, and it is still owned by his family. His son Rodolphe has run it since 2017. That structure is rare among the giants, but it isn't unique, and the exception is the most important company in the industry. MSC, the world's largest container line, is also private, also family-controlled, also answerable to no stock market. Between them, the number 1 and number 3 carriers on the planet are family businesses, which turned out to matter enormously because of what happened next. In 2020, an industry that had spent a decade barely breaking even discovered what happens when the world orders everything at once and the ships run out. The sequence is almost hard to read. In the second quarter of 2019, CMA CGM lost $109 million. By the third quarter of 2020, it was making $567 million. In the fourth quarter of 2021, $6.7 billion, a record. 3 months later, it beat that with $7.2 billion in a single quarter, more than 3 times the same quarter a year earlier. Full year 2021, $17.9 billion in net profit. Full year 2022, $24.9 billion. None of this was a stroke of genius. Every major carrier had a version of it. Freight rates rose to levels nobody had modeled, and container lines across the world printed money for 2 years. What differed was what they did with it. Several of the large listed carriers returned much of the windfall to their shareholders, in dividends and buybacks, to investors who had waited through a decade of thin margins. That is the ordinary pressure a public company operates under. CMA CGM reinvested close to 90% of its 2022 profit, $21.8 billion, kept inside the business. MSC, similarly private, similarly family-run, went on the largest ship-buying spree in modern shipping history. The difference wasn't strategy so much as who had to be persuaded. A listed carrier has outside equity holders with a claim on profits and a reasonable expectation of receiving some. A family-controlled company has the same board obligations and the same bondholders, but no outside shareholders demanding a payout, and no one who can force the question. So a single family could take the largest annual profit in French corporate history and decide, essentially alone, to spend all of it. Which leaves the only question that mattered: on what? The answer begins with a problem that has frustrated container lines for 30 years, one with nothing to do with newspapers and everything to do with how small a share of the customer's money a shipping company actually gets to touch. A company in Vietnam makes furniture. A retailer in Ohio sells it. Between those 2 points sits a chain of operations: a truck to the factory gate, storage, customs paperwork, a drive to the port, the ocean crossing, a terminal at the other end, customs again, a warehouse, a distribution center, and a final delivery to the store. The shipping line does one of those things. It is the most visible part of the journey and by far the most capital intensive. And it is also the part where the money is worst. Ocean freight is a commodity. A box on one carrier's ship is identical to a box on another's, so the main lever is price. And price collapses whenever there are too many ships. Everything else in that chain, the warehousing, the customs work, the last mile, is a service business with contracts, relationships, and margins that don't evaporate the moment a competitor undercuts you. For decades, carriers watched freight forwarders and logistics companies sell the whole journey, subcontract the ocean leg, and keep the difference. The carrier owned billions of dollars of ships and captured the thinnest slice of what the customer paid. You cannot fix that by putting warehouses, customs brokers, trucking fleets, and delivery networks into 160 countries takes decades, and you would spend them competing against incumbents who already have the buildings, the licenses, and the customers. You fix it by buying, and that takes an amount of cash almost nobody in this industry has ever had at once. CMA CGM had it. The strategy predates the windfall. CEVA Logistics came in 2019, a freight forwarder the company took control of and spent years restructuring. During the boom itself came GEFCO and Automotive Logistics, Ingram Micro's Commerce and Lifecycle Services arm, and the home delivery specialist Colas Privé. Then, with the money banked, the scale changed. In February 2024, CMA CGM completed the acquisition of Bolloré Logistics for €4.85 billion, around $5.2 billion, the largest purchase in the company's history. It brought 14,000 employees, 900,000 square meters of warehousing, and operations across 111 countries. Combined with CEVA, it created the fifth largest logistics group in the world. Since then, FedEx's supply chain division, for $1.4 billion. Freightliner, a British rail freight operator, completed this year. And the ports, which are the other half of the same idea. Phoenix Marine Services in Los Angeles, the GCT terminals in New York and New Jersey for $2.8 billion, renamed Port Liberty, Lekki in Nigeria, Santos in Brazil, Nhava Sheva in India, around 60 terminals across 30 countries. The logic connecting all of it is consistent. Own the ships, own the boxes, own the berth they arrive at, own the warehouse they go to and the truck that takes them the last mile. Then sell the customer one contract for the whole journey instead of competing on the price of the middle. Every one of those purchases answers a question the company had been asking for 30 years. None of them explains a newspaper. The media buying began in October 2022, as the boom was already turning down. The first purchase was small and unexpected. CMA CGM bought the La Provence Group, the regional daily of Marseille, plus Corse Matin and Corsica, for around €100 million. One French report put that at roughly 5 times the title's assessed value. Marseille is the company's home city and La Provence is its hometown paper, so a local purchase at €100 million against a $24 billion annual profit could be read as a rounding error with sentimental value. Then it kept going. Late 2022, a stake in M6, one of France's main commercial broadcasters. Summer 2024, BFM TV, the radio network RMC, and the channels RMC Découverte and RMC Story, bought from Altice for €1.55 billion. June 2025, the aerospace magazine Air and Cosmos. September 2025, Brut, an online video outlet built for social platforms, employing around 250 people. Days later, the channel Cherie 25, rebranded RMC Life. This year, the sports channel RMC Sport, currently being finalized. In January, a partnership with YouTube covering 1,000 hours of content a year. In 3 years, a container shipping company assembled what the group describes as the second largest newsroom in France, over 1,600 journalists, spanning national television, national radio, regional and national newspapers, and social video. The company's stated reasoning is consolidation. CMA Media's chief executive, Claire Laoste, has argued publicly that French audiovisual groups need scale to withstand competition from global platforms. It is a real argument, made across Europe. It also has nothing to do with shipping. The concerns raised in France run along a different line. In September 2025, the journalist societies at BFM TV, RMC, and La Tribune issued a public statement objecting to something specific. An opinion piece written by Rodolphe Saadé, published in La Provence, had been read out on air at BFM. Their stated concern was the confusion between the role of shareholder and the role of editorialist. The context was political. France had just seen the Bloc 12 protest movement, and Saadé had written that businesses are partners of the nation. The objection was structural. The owner's political opinion had traveled from one property he owns onto the airwaves of another. There has also been a concrete cost inside the group. CMA Media moved to merge the digital newsrooms of La Tribune and BFM Business under a plan covering 56 journalist redundancies, with 32 redeployments, at a paper with 37 permanent editorial staff. Journalists at La Tribune went on strike. And there is a regulatory gap. Reporters Without Borders has listed the Brut acquisition among the transactions driving media concentration in France, and noted that the European Media Freedom Act, fully in effect since August 2025, requires member states to assess media acquisitions for their impact on pluralism. France has not implemented that mechanism. Nothing here establishes editorial interference, and nobody has alleged a finding of it. What is established is narrower and harder to dismiss. One family now owns France's most watched news channel and its largest private newsroom, alongside a global shipping and logistics group. And France currently has no functioning process for assessing whether that combination raises a problem. The boom that paid for all of this lasted about 2 years. By 2023, CMA CGM's net profit had fallen from $24.9 billion to $3.6 billion. Revenue dropped by more than a third. The freight market did what freight markets always do. Rates collapsed, new ships arrived, and the extraordinary became ordinary again. That was always going to happen, and the numbers from that year show why the money went where it did. In 2023, CMA CGM's maritime revenue fell by 46.7%. Its logistics revenue fell by 5.5%. Both went down. One went down 9 times harder. That gap is the entire argument for the strategy. Ocean freight swings from quarterly losses to $7 billion of quarterly profit and back within 3 years. Warehousing, customs brokerage, rail and terminal concessions move too, but nothing like that far. What the acquisitions bought was a business whose worst years are survivable. The media assets sit outside that argument, and the company's stated rationale for them is different. Media consolidation, not supply chain integration. Which means the same fortune bought 2 distinct things: a more stable business and a substantial voice in the national conversation of the country the family lives in. Whether those belong in the same hands is not a shipping question. It is the question France has not yet built a way to ask. What is certain is that the window closed. The 2022 profit was the largest in French corporate history, and the conditions that produced it, a pandemic, a buying surge, and a fleet that ran out of ships, are gone. The assets are still there. Terminal concessions run for decades. Logistics networks and rail operators can be sold, but they don't evaporate the way a cash balance does when freight rates turn. 2 extraordinary years produced a fortune that will not come again in this form, and one family decided, essentially alone, where all of it went. The ships still sail. The question is what else got built while the money was there.